Hi, I'm Alex, and welcome to the Research Room, a space to make research by the people for the people.
Perfect synergy.
And today I'm going to keep talking about pain. So I hope that at the end of this today, that you'll be able to get something that's actually of use to you, that I'll walk through an intervention that is meant to help pain and all of its comorbidities. And by comorbidities, all I mean is that there are other conditions that you might have simultaneously with that pain. And so I'm going to be talking through some research that is a review on a specific type of intervention that has been shown to, pretty reliably reduce pain, as well as these other conditions that go alongside of it. So this was all done by Swati Mehta back in 2019. And I feel like I've been doing just a lot of 2019 papers recently, but maybe it was a really good year for all this. Her paper was called Internet Delivered Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Chronic Health Conditions, a systematic review and meta-analysis. So this is another meta-analysis. It's a whole review that was already done on this topic. And I just want to help distill it and see maybe it's going to be something of use to you. So when it comes to pain, and especially this chronic health kind of pain, that can definitely start to drive other conditions like excess stress. That could be depression. That could be anxiety. It could be things like a loss of self-control. And so with all these things that are happening, like sometimes it's not really adequate to only deal with the pain. You have to also deal with these other things because that's going to either further reinforce the pain or also take away from like whatever other medical regimen that the person's supposed to be on to deal with the pain. If you are too anxious to actually do the things that your doctor is telling you, then maybe you should also be focusing on that anxiety, making sure you're reducing that so that you can then hopefully get rid of the pain. And so this kind of approach, I think, can really help amplify these effects. So maybe even taking a step back a little bit, when you think of pain and pain treatment, what might you normally think about? Maybe you might usually think about just taking some medication. Maybe you think about going to physical therapy, but you could also potentially see like going to a psychological therapist and talking through some things. And that really starts to get at like the psychological factors that underlie pain, especially again, chronic pain, that it's no longer just like this really biological thing. It's much more intertwined with your biology as well as your psychology. Maybe you even start to turn to just like doing things on your own, and you start to go online and you look up some stuff. You start to see what's out there. What information can you gather? What other things can you start to do? And that's kind of the premise of what this other intervention is that I'll be talking about for the rest of this time. And so this other intervention, it's all based on cognitive behavioral therapy. So that is, it's shown to be a very good thing. In general, for many different conditions. Thinking about it in the context of pain, I think it would also be great. So cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, this has a few different components. One would be the cognitive side, which is trying to restructure any thoughts that you have. Maybe you can reframe the way that you're perceiving things. Maybe you start to become a little bit more optimistic about some of the things that are happening in your life. Maybe you're also just trying to like restructure how you're thinking about like the meaning of life, and hopefully in a very positive sort of way. There are also behavioral aspects. This could include like actually learning some skills that will help actually get through whatever condition that you're going through. So maybe in the case of like depression, how do you learn how to like manage your time, and how do you make sure that you have like a good like sleep schedule, and like how do you also make sure that you are getting adequate exercise and things like that. All these things that you can imagine are very difficult to actually like motivate yourself to do. And that's why these two things go hand in hand, the cognitive side as well as the behavioral side. If you can start to rearrange your thoughts, that might also affect your behaviors. As you continue to do behaviors, that's going to come back and like reinforce your thoughts. And these kind of go back and forth. And so it makes sense to just kind of like put them together into a treatment and then disperse that to people. And so that's what's happening here is this is specifically looking at internet-based CBT. So you don't have to go in and see an actual therapist. Instead, you can just go online, sign in whenever you want. And there are a couple different versions of this. One would be with guidance, one would be without guidance. And I'll get into if there's any differences there. But with guidance, you can at least touch base with a therapist, and maybe that's like half an hour. You can talk to them, and then you kind of just you learn the lessons on your own time. Aside from that, or of course, there's the completely unguided, and then that's just you going through the program on your own. And I think when it comes to pain, like this idea, like really, I think speaks to me. Like, of course, it's not going to be meant for everyone, but I think it could really help a lot of people, right? That especially if you are having chronic pain, like that is so debilitating sometimes that like having to do the extra effort of going into an actual therapist office or even the doctor's office for that matter. If you had to do that extra step, like there's just so many other barriers to that. Like it's not as simple as like you get in your car, you go and everything's fine. You're in pain. You're in pain enough to like maybe you don't even want to go to your car. Maybe you're in pain to the point where like sitting in a car is very uncomfortable. Things like that. So if you have limited mobility, then that is going to be very much a barrier to even going along with some of these treatment options. Of course, there's other things that could affect anyone, which is just like simply the geography of things, right? That if you are too far from any center that can provide CBT, then that's going to be very difficult again to like get that motivation. Like I have to drive 40 minutes to an hour to get there every single day, and that's only one way, right? As opposed to doing things online where like you just hop onto a computer and you're already there. There's also the other like stigma that goes along with this, right? That if you feel like someone might judge you if they were to see you going back and forth between the therapist office and home, maybe your neighbors see you like every single week. You're going out at the same time, and they start to like wonder. Like, hopefully, your neighbors aren't nosy to that point, and hopefully, they're also not judgmental at that point. But it happens, right? And regardless if it happens, like we in the back of our heads think about that, and I think that's completely like fair. So there's that like stigma about it that like you don't even have to like show up anywhere. Like you just stay in your home and you have the privacy of your own home, and you can go through the CBT treatment right there. And so all of this is put together because, especially one of the facets that I was talking about earlier, that there could be just a loss of control. And especially if you are doing things on your own, you start to regain that control. When you think about these chronic conditions where there's pain involved, like you do really have to like start to rely on a lot of other people. You have to rely on hopefully friends or your significant others, and maybe your children to help you just like with some daily sorts of activities. The same thing goes for like you can't just like do anything whenever you want. Like you have to schedule things in a certain way to make sure that like you're giving yourself enough like time and space and like the energy that goes into all these things. You might have to like stick to a pretty strict medical regimen, and that also takes away from like, oh, like I wish I could just like do other things, but now I have to like make sure I'm thinking ahead to like take some medication or whatever else goes on with that. So this just allowing yourself to go online and like, oh, like I can do this when I want. I can look up the things that I want. I can pay more attention to the things that I want, whatever that is. You start to gain that self-control back, and I think that's great. So this meta-analysis, what they ended up doing was there were 25 papers that they got together, 25 studies, And this was on a whole different range of things. So they had pain, they had tinnitus, they had fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, cardiovascular disease, cancer, spinal cord injury, and just any other combination of pain that a participant might have been feeling. So all of these are not like directly pain chronic conditions, but they are all associated with pain. And so through this CBT, or this online version of CBT, that they were thinking that, oh, like we can hopefully reduce pain and also hopefully reduce some of these other conditions that surround it, like anxiety and depression. And I mean, that is exactly what they found, that on the whole, internet CBT ended up doing very well. It was able to reduce anxiety and depression just in the same way that they were thinking. Something else that was really cool here is that they did a lot of different comparisons. They not just like, they didn't just want to say like, oh, online CBT is good, but also is it good relative to what else we know? And so some of the different comparisons that they made were compared to online discussions. So there are online forums that you could go onto and you can try to get help. You can try to vent there. You can just like talk to other people. And this internet CBT ended up doing better than those online discussion forums. This also, I think, kind of surprisingly, this was better than just the standard care that you might get in any old hospital. And I mean, there's a whole slew of things that hospitals and doctors could be doing. So there's no like one approach, but compared to the treatment that they normally would have gotten otherwise, if they do this internet CBT, then they also end up doing better. They reduce depression and anxiety that much more. Same thing goes compared to other waitlist controls. So literally just like if they were compared to people that were told like in a few months, you'll be able to get this treatment. But for now, you won't be getting it. If you compare the people that did get it compared to the ones that didn't and are waiting for it, they also ended up doing better than that. So cool, right? I think some other cool things here is that it doesn't end up doing worse than other things that we might also be thinking about, other treatments that we might be thinking about. So if you compare this to getting information, just like information on its own, without the other things that go along with cognitive behavioral therapy, it doesn't do any better than that necessarily, but it also doesn't do worse, which I think is good to know. That at the very least, it's not a worse option. And it's another pathway if someone is feeling comfortable with that. Also comparing this to actual group CBT. So instead of an individualized version of this, if you are placed in a group and as a group you go through therapy sessions together, then it also does not do any worse than that. And I mean, group CBT is a very like common practice, and it's good to know that it's also just as efficacious as group CBT. And so, yeah, I mean, I think overall, pretty promising stuff. Of course, it is newer than like CBT on its own or like other practices, but it's already showing a lot of actual promise that it could be something that could be used for the future, as long as they continue working on this and making this widely available as possible. And so one other major component here is that we have to think about the guided versus unguided nature of CBT. So usually if you're thinking about CBT, there is a therapist that's there, and that makes a lot of sense. They had to get a lot of training in order to do this. And so you want to be able to like tap into that expertise and not just do this on your own. But actually, this study ended up showing that it's not necessary for the therapist to also be there in certain conditions. So, well, at least when it comes to anxiety, it didn't matter if it was guided or unguided. The only thing though that like you have to think about, and there aren't like good studies that really I guess disentangle this. So in those anxiety studies that did the internet-based CBT, what ended up happening was they still were sent reminders and things like that. So to make sure that they're being on top of the treatment. And so, of course, that's not the same as like talking to a therapist, but it is something. It's still a very loose form of guidance that you're at least getting reminders on what to do and when to do it. Um, this didn't end up working exactly the same when it comes to depression. So for depression, um, the guided did do a little bit better than the unguided. I would say that they both still worked, but the guided did do a little bit better. And you can sort of think like maybe that does make sense. That like yeah, being able to just like talk to somebody else, especially if your confidence is not as high, if your self-esteem isn't quite as high, if you're feeling like it's something just isn't quite right. If you are able to like have a little bit more social connection in trying to pursue this internet-based CBT. If you're wanting to not feel lonely, if you're not wanting to just like do this on your own, like I think all that can make a lot of sense. And just like having somebody help you reframe something, even just like once more, I think that could really make a difference in this kind of case. So it does do a little bit better in the case of depression, but not necessarily for anxiety. Other cool things is that um, this internet-based CBT, this also was able to reduce pain severity and also increase self-efficacy. And so it was also shown to potentially get rid of some of these other detrimental like thinking patterns of like catastrophizing, which I was talking about last week as well. This idea of catastrophizing does keep coming up, and for good reasons. Um, and so with this internet-based CBT, that was able to actually decrease catastrophizing, decrease the pain, and increase self-efficacy. And this was particularly for people with either some sort of pain or with fibromyalgia, as this study ended up looking into. So all this is I think, great that we can see on multiple layers it's helping. And I think one other like question that we really should be asking is, okay, like great that it helps, but like, do people actually want it? And I mean, it does seem like people do want it. It seems like people are finding that this method is acceptable, at least on average across the studies that I've looked into it. Um, People do end up liking it. And so I think it's worth pursuing to put more resources into this, making sure that the online materials are like potentially standardized to some degree and like looked over and like reviewed, and making sure like we're really putting out like quality content for the people that want it. Um, yeah, I think that would be great. But I think I would also like just be super curious, like, what do you think? Like, is this something that you would actually do? Is this something that you would want to do? We'll see. Um, I did also want to do something a little bit different, and I wanted to like put this all into context, and maybe by walking through an actual example of like, okay, I've been saying internet-based CBT, great, right? Like you have the general outline of what that might mean, but I want to like look at through an actual study and say like step by step, this is what they actually ended up doing, and this is potentially why it helped. And so it helps to also just like have somebody in mind as you're thinking through this, and like why it might or might not help. Because of course everyone has individual differences. It's not going to work for everyone, but we do hope that's going to help more people than not. So I also want to tie this into something that like maybe a lot of people have had I guess the pleasure of watching recently. Of course, that's Squid Games. That there was quite the character that made Squid Games, going by the name Il Nam. And he's like, of course, the big bad. And maybe I'll maybe I shouldn't have said that first. Maybe I should have said spoiler warning first. But now that you know, I do want to take this character, and of course, like it's not going to be true to Squid Games entirely, but I do think like we can still take his character and like walk through this. So he's diagnosed with brain tumors. He was not going to make it. So I do want to like amend that a little bit. Like, let's say that maybe it's something that he could have worked on and ended up surviving because plenty of people do end up having brain tumors and get the treatment that they need and are perfectly fine after that. Um, but still, in any case, like there's going to be pain associated with it. There's going to be other conditions that are associated with it that could literally change your other psychological well-being. That could make somebody depressed. So and I think that would also be the case here with Ilnam. He probably was depressed, given some of the other things that he said. That money just like it doesn't do anything for him anymore. He's reached the point where like he just kind of feels empty, and so I think let's say that we were to give Ilnam this treatment, this internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy. What would happen? What would he have gone through? And I would say like this would make some pretty drastic changes in his life. So what this study did was they created a website, rahelp.org. So for rheumatoid arthritis, this could easily be adapted to another condition, but this is generally what they did here. And so they had both individual and group components. What they did was they made sure all participants that were in the experimental condition of actually getting the internet-based CBT, there's also a controlled condition here. As long as they were in the experimental condition and received the intervention, then that meant that they learned about the intervention itself. They learned the rationale behind it. They learned about all the other stressors that might be influencing them. And I think already right off the bat, like that would have been like great, I think, for somebody to like sit down and talk to Ilnam about this, that there's other things happening in your life and that's going to be affecting your like will to survive and like maybe some of the other like malicious thoughts that you might be having about creating Squid Game. And it doesn't just leave it there. It's going to give people effective coping strategies. So thinking about like, oh, if you are monitoring like, hey, like I have this thought like, oh, I should create this game where everyone ends up having to compete against each other, then that is going to be maybe not the best thing. Maybe there's other things that you can do that to like help cope with some of your distress and some of your depression that's occurring here, Ilham. And so what exactly they might do, that might end up like giving like a list of different things that like, oh, like what do you think might be right here? He can choose different coping strategies and try them out and see what works for him. Then I would say in this treatment, they also ended up giving just like more information on like different life goals. And so this was a huge thing for Ilnam, that his life goal, it seemed to really have dissipated at a certain point, that again, that money just wasn't fulfilling him anymore. He didn't really have any goals. He was already like saturated with like so much of that like hedonistic like pleasure sort of thing, right? And so without anything else to fulfill him, without any sort of meaning, he ended up wanting to create Squid Game. And so that not right, like there's so many other things that he could have potentially done. Yes, he was not satisfied with his current life, but if you learn about other ways that you can think about your life, other goals that you can potentially have, other meaning that you can create with your life, that I think would absolutely help. He also probably had pain. Brain tumors can be a very painful thing. They can cause some intense headaches, other bodily symptoms as well, especially if it's pressing up against certain parts of your brain. And so I'm going to go ahead and assume that he had pain. And this CBT, the internet-based CBT, would also give directions on how else to manage that pain, whether that means some sorts of exercise. Maybe it's they were already on medication and they need to continue taking that medication, whatever else it is that might help regulate that pain. And that also just like that's going to seep into the rest of his life, the rest of like, oh, I'm not going to feel as bad anymore, I'm not going to feel as stressed anymore. Like when you're constantly in pain, like that is such a aggravating and like and it's an irritating thing, and like like that takes away from the rest of like your concentration ability, right? So along with that, there's the emotional responses that, again, that irritability that might be like building in the background, and like other things might just like set you off, and like you feel like you really need to do something drastic in order to stop that. um, the internet-based CBT would help with those emotional responses. And I think especially in this case, like I haven't explicitly said this yet, but like I think he should probably have the guided version. And also, like as we saw, like people that are facing depression, they also should probably have the guided versus the unguided. And so hopefully somebody would also just like help remind and reinforce, like, hey, like you're having these feelings, that's fine. There are plenty of skills that you have also learned throughout this that you can start to apply here. And so again, keep track of what's happening, and maybe try this the next time that that's happening, or maybe even asking him like, what do you think might be best here, and helping guide to the right answer. Also managing change. So again, with when it comes to pain and chronic pain conditions, that also means that there's going to be change that is occurring in your life. Those things that you used to be able to do, you might not be able to do anymore, or you have to ask for help or whatever. It's helping manage all of those other little things that are happening that can really like wear you down if you're not like being aware and like conscious of it, and like dealing with it in a either like an accepting sort of way or like a more active sort of way. Self-esteem, I think it's of course an assumption, but like someone who feels the need to do something as drastic as Squid Game, I'm literally creating it, I would imagine also just doesn't have that much self-esteem, like, and also just with as empty as he was feeling at the point that he started to create it, that money didn't mean anything else, and like does he even have anything else to his identity at that point? um, his self-esteem is probably not that high. And so if we could create that sense of self that is above and beyond just his money, right, like that would absolutely help. I mean, we have to suspend our belief a little bit, right? Like it's not going to be easy to convince somebody like Ilnam, but I imagine all these things, like if you get him at the right moment, if you teach him these things, if he was able to look through these things and like talk to somebody every once in a while, like that would absolutely help. Um, so these are some of the individual components. I'll quickly say these other group components as well, that you get to learn about relationship skills. How do you talk to people? How do you make sure that you're getting the support that you need as well? Thinking about community participation. So on this website that was in the actual study, they ended up making sure that like other people could talk to each other on the website itself. So they created like their mini profiles, they had their avatars instead of like their profile pictures, and they were able to just like talk to people somewhat anonymously. And I think that's super good, right? Like that you're able to just like express yourself and like hear other people and like see how you are relating to them, and like find that purpose and that meaning again, that social connection that he probably was not really getting, especially as someone who was just so done with life at that point. And so that I think would also very much help. It would help with managing his pain, but also his depression. And so with all of that, and these are all again components of a real life intervention that I think could have helped someone like Ilnam here. So what they ended up finding in this specific study was if people were in that condition where they went through the internet-based CBT, they ended up having more self-efficacy again. They had less pain. They had better quality of life. Maybe something that was like kind of interesting here was that they had fewer social interactions, but they also ended up feeling less lonely. And so it probably is much more about like the quality of the connections rather than the quantity of connections, which This also lasted up to 9 months later. So a pretty like strong effect here, like just up between 5 to 10 weeks of this internet-based CBT that lasted long enough to still have positive effects 9 months later. So cool stuff, I think, right? I hope that you also enjoyed me bringing like an actual character into this. And I can definitely do more of this if you think that's helpful, or at least more interesting than just like listen to me talk, right? Um, so the thing I want to leave here on the note that I want to leave on is this is one definitely like avenue of progress here that's trying to utilize existing technology and things that are continuing to be like improved upon and made more accessible, right? And that's great. We don't have to keep relying on the medical health field, which like is already overburdened, and there's so many other things that go on with that. If you want to talk about that some more, like my last week podcast absolutely talks in great detail about that. But I think the more that we can like really teach people to be like efficient and like self-efficacious, that's going to help so much. If you can figure out how to like actually help people with any like loss of control, that is going to be very it makes sense that people would have that feeling of loss of control or lower self-esteem or like things like that are just going to make their condition worse and worse. I think that'd be a great thing to be able to implement. And so one other avenue that this could happen, I'm just going to like mention this because I want you to be aware that like this is probably on the horizon, that there's quite a bit of work on virtual reality, and that's only becoming more and more prevalent. It is not at the point where like it's just like in everyone's home, of course, in the same way that like maybe computers or TVs are. Um, but it's getting there. It's getting to a place where more and more people are getting access to it. And so I think there's good like preliminary evidence that this is also helpful for pain. It could be helpful for in the moment sort of pain, like as you are feeling the pain. If you are now in this virtual reality world, that's going to help decrease that pain either through distractions. That's going to help figure out like how do you refocus your attention instead of focusing on the pain. You can focus on this like immersive world that you're now in. And then it can also like help teach other behaviors. So it could literally teach you like how to meditate, how to like breathe properly, and like all these other things that would also help smooth that pain. And so that it helps with like that momentary pain. It also could potentially help with chronic pain for similar sort of reasons. And so I kind of wanted to mention that like there's going to be a lot of options, I think, relatively soon. There's still plenty of work that needs to be done, but like maybe even more important than like these options is like what do you want to happen? Like, and I think your voice is going to very much like propel what is actually going to be acceptable or not. And yeah, I mean, um, there's nothing else that we can do other than like at least say something. And I think with enough people saying like, oh, like this is actually something that I would want in my life versus like, oh, I don't like this at all. If there's no market for it, like that's going to be the end of that. And so yeah, our voices and opinions are definitely important here and can make some impact. So these are things that are coming up. I imagine they'll continue coming up more and more. And hopefully, along with that, there's going to be the education that goes along with it. There's going to be equitable accessibility to it as well. But I guess time will tell on if that's actually the case. So I'll leave this here for today. We're going to talk about pain a little bit more. We have one more week of this. So next week, we're going to be talking about the measurement of pain. How should we actually be measuring it and then like disclosing it to other people? Like what's actually helpful for doctors? What's going to be helpful for the other people in our lives that like hopefully we can turn to? So that's going to all be coming up next week. And then the last thing here is please check out the rest of our stuff. We still have stuff on roomforresearch.com as well as at Room for Research on social media. And so please check out those other things. Um, and we hope that you're getting something from this. And if not, please let us know. And so until next week, thank you for your time, and I'll see you then. Bye for now.
With the sun will breathe perfect sense.